Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Dennis. Welcome to Patinacode and to another edition of So You Want to Build an AD.
I'm cold right out, I'm done. Come on.
Hello, once again, everybody, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of So You Want to Build an AD, powered by LS Fabrication. And today is a big day. We got a lot of stuff going on. We got the floor bracing cleaned off. Now we have our floor cleaned off and fixed up. So you remember I cut into it and I patched it. I'm going to give you a look at what we did. And this here is the driver's side. And we've got him relatively flat. I took it over to the flat table and beat it straight. And there's just one spot right here where we need to take back to the table and get them hammered out and get this nice and flat and even across the board. I had to weld up the plug holes here. From these holes were there, they had the floor misaligned. You can see that that's like way off center, right? So it's not going to work right for what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make it perfect, but we're trying to make it right. You understand? So that's filled in. We will get that ground down on the back side. We've taken care of that. And I've worked really hard on getting all of this stuff cleaned off. All the booger welds are gone. And it's now flat across here and ready for the floor bracing to go back on. But before we can do any of the floor brace remounting and all that stuff, we have to gain access to this rocker panel on the driver's side. I bent it up a little bit while I was deconstructing all of this, and it's going to be a simple process to straighten it out. It's going to be a little tricky because there's a contour to it, but that's fine. We can work with that. But in order to gain access to it so that we can straighten it out properly, we're going to have to remove the A-pillar on the bottom side. So the lower A-pillar has to come off, and then from that point, we will be able to straighten out the rocker, get the bracing up there, get the floor up there, mock everything up, use our crane here to level up the cab and get everything where it's supposed to be. And then once we're satisfied with that, we can start putting tack welds on things. We don't want to weld anything solid yet because there's still a lot of iffiness going on with this cab. So when you look at it, some people might be like, well, why didn't you brace the cab before you cut it apart? Well, here's the reason why. The cab was welded together so catawampus that if I would have braced it that way, it would have went back together that way. So basically, we're starting from scratch, and we're not going to have any bracing because we've got to get the truck back to where it's supposed to be. It's okay. I'm going to show you a couple tips and tricks on how you can achieve that if you're in the situation as I am, where the cab is just all broke down anyway, and bracing it would have kept it broke down. So we're going to get to that. But first, we're just going to look at the inside of this thing and kind of figure out where we need to be. So once we get to the point of cutting off the lower A-pillar, we're going to be replacing it with a new lower A-pillar. We're going to do the same for the other side. We're also going to replace the cowling. And I'm going to show you guys how we're going to get all that stuff loose and how we're going to get everything back together. I'm talking a little bit too much. Now you know what we got to do. Let's get into all this. So here's a look at what we have right now, and it's not a pretty sight, as we know. It's messed up. One thing that I want to point out that I want you to really look at is that this is the top of the rocker. So we got to do a little bit of straightening on it. We got to get this 90 back to a 90. It's kind of upwards. It might be hard to tell in the video, but what I really want you to notice is look how far below the mounting point it is. The rocker should not be down that far, for the simple fact of we're going to have bracing sitting here. So that lets you know the bracing is going to stand up probably about that high. And then it has to make contact with the rocker. So that just tells you how far down the cab was. It's just atrocious. And this is why we have our engine hoist here. And we can use it to raise and level our cab. And we just simply pump it. And it'll raise it up to the point that it needs to be. It's still, you know, very... It's like a box right now when you open both ends of the box, how it can shift. So everything can still shift around. So you do have to pay attention. Just slightly tugging on it, you know, it messes with the other side of the cab, you know, and it gets it out of square. But we're going to get in here and we're going to try to alleviate all that. And the first thing that I'm going to do so I can gain access to this rocker and see what we have to do to repair it. You can see they blew through it. But we can grind that down and we can see what we got to do. You know, I might cut a piece of metal, put in a patch or something. I can do it without replacing the whole rocker, I believe. So that's what we're going to do. First thing you want to know is that when you buy just the repair panel for the lower A-pillar, it does not come with the hinge pocket for your bolts to go through for your door hinges. So we're going to have to get this off of here and reuse it. And that's not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. So you see how much room you got here on this replacement panel. And it's about, I don't know, up to there. But you don't want to cut this to the same height. What we're going to do, so we're not using this anymore. What I like to do is cut right here. Right here, cut as close as you can along that line, and that will give us from here up for usable parts. All right, guys, that was some real positive progress. You can see we have the lower A-pillar off of the driver's side. And inside here, that's where the bolts for your door hinges mount. We don't have this part, so we need to get this extracted from here as best we can, or else we're going to end up having to order us this piece. As some of you might have noticed, there's a broken stud inside of the hinge for the door hinge. And these little things, these little nuts back here, you know, it started to spin on them and they couldn't get it off. So when they were messing with it, they just hacked it off. What I'm going to do is get it out of there. And then I'm just going to simply weld a nut to it. And then when we put our bolt in, it'll be stuck to it and it won't spin on us anymore. And then I'm further gonna go and tack the other two just so they don't spin on me, because that does suck. But we're just gonna clean them off and then tack them on like real heavy tacks to get them stuck in place. This is still, it's rusty, but it's still solid. There's no need to buy a new one, and we're gonna just reuse it. There is a part where they got into it with their welding, so I'm going to take the time and just get the same thickness metal here and just go across and make the little channel, make it bend right there, because it goes against here for support. And then, of course, it's tack welded on because there's a lip that's going to touch inside there. But we'll get to that later on. It's just minor things. And, yeah, we got it off of there without destroying things. Now let's move on to getting the cowling off of the truck. And the first thing we're going to do to get this off so that we know exactly where we got to go to cut with is we're going to clean off this old primer and stuff that's on the side of the truck, because that's going to reveal where this thing is seamed at, and that's where we want to cut. We don't want to get too high. It's always good to get low, but we don't want to go too high and screw everything up. Just as you noticed when we were cutting this off, we cut it from the lowest point possible. And the reason for that is because we have a lot of material with this one. We don't want to cut ourselves short. So by cutting this one as low as possible, now you can see how much we got to work with, and we also have that much more space to work with on the vehicle itself. We can always trim it back, trim it back. I prefer to trim on the panel rather than the structure of the truck, unless it's, of course, it's a bad piece. So it's just a little bit of finesse, a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, but that's all it takes to do this stuff. So let's move on to the next step. We're going to clean off this cowling and then reveal where we're going to have to cut to get that loose. So before we begin with this, as I said, there's a seam here. It's a lead-filled seam from the factory. You'll notice these little spots here. This is filler from where they were covering up the holes from where the factory mirrors attached here. Many people do it. They're honestly, they're ugly the way they come out, you know, and people will opt for the peat mirror or whatnot. But we're going to go back with these just for the simple fact that nobody else does it unless they're doing a factory restore or whatnot. Or sometimes they will put them back here, but then they'll fabricate the arm to make it look a little more pleasant. We're going to put it on there the way that it's supposed to be, just for the simple fact, as I said, not too many people do. And yeah, it's ugly how it does its shit, but that's the whole point, you know. So never mind that. You see the crease here, and it would wrap around, and our replacement panel is built the exact same way. But we'll get to getting this off once we get this part cleaned off, so we can see exactly where we need to go. And you can also come on the inside and get an idea of what's going on. There's a piece of panel there, and that was actually part of the kick panel. You see it's been hacked out of there, but we can remove that very gingerly, and then you would have full access to the other panel. So I'm gonna get up in there and I'm gonna do a little bit of trimming and pulling, because I want to see if I can get that panel out of there to reveal the other side. One other note, so on the 52s 3/4, they have the tracking for your windlays. And fortunate enough for me, you know, after building a few of these trucks, I got leftover pieces of that tracking. So I simply pulled it apart, and it's spot welded on. That's the remnants from the spot weld. So when we go back in with it, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to get this sanded down and cleaned up so we can put our tracking back on. But first, the kick panel has to go on, and then the tracking. We cut it up here, which is a good spot, and now we're good to go. All right, so now that we've got the paint and the primer off the side here, it's revealed the lead fill, and which I was talking about, and I'm gonna bring you over here for you to check it out. You're gonna want to be extremely cautious at this point. Again, just like everything else, you want to make sure you leave yourself enough working room to work. Right? You don't want to cut anything too short. And so our replacement panel is made to go back where this goes. If you notice, it's got a lip, and it comes inward a little bit because it's going to go up and under this flap here. I call it a flap, but this is the upper part of the cowl. This would be the mid part, lower part of the cowling. But it goes like that, and that's what we got to duplicate. But we got to be real careful taking this out of here, because there's a set of nuts in it. Well, set nuts, or they're welded nuts. They're welded on, and they hold the hinges for the hood. So you don't want to cut this out and mess it up. That's what this little loop is here for. It's so that it can slide up and behind that welded nut on back there. So we have to be diligent, and we have to pay attention to what we're doing. So let me get you over here and give you guys a look at this lead fill. And there's a couple spots on here. It's something that I want to point out as well. All right, we're going to start right here at this point. This is where the hood hinges would bolt on. this is that set nut that I was talking about. So when we go to removing this, we're going to want to be careful that we don't damage it. If we knock it out, that's one thing. But if we mess it up, well then, you know, you could just always put another nut there. But why bother? Why mess it up? So be careful getting this apart. We're going to pry this apart to get it loose. And then you come up here, you can see where it looks to be spot welded. And if you look right here, you can see all of the seam, like where the lead fill is, looking across to the lead fill. And you can see the seam coming across, so it goes through here somewhere. And what I've started doing is chiseling it out. And that's what you're going to want to do next. Chisel the lead fill out. Get your safety garb on as far as your eye protection, because this shit is extremely sharp and it could go flying out. You don't want it in your eye. So you can, I mean, I got a chisel that could get in there, but I like this little, I bought these cheap screwdrivers from Harbor Freight because they have like a finer point. And they're really good working tools as chisels when you're trying to chisel something like easy like this and some other things that we use to pry with. So I like to save my chisels for when I need them to do some real chiseling. And I'll just buy these little things. Like you go to Harbor Freight and buy something, they give them away, right? So use the chisel, get this chiseled out. That's what I'm getting ready to do. And then we'll come back and take a look at what else is going on. We're looking good, looking good. We got it chiseled out. And the next thing we're going to want to do is pry it up loose from there. We're going to want to come down here. There's a little weld right there. And we're just going to take the angle grinder and zip that free. If we cut into this panel, who cares? It's going away anyway. But be careful, do not cut into the upper one. Definitely don't damage your threads for your hood hinge. But just zip through that. It's a spot weld, but just get it broke free. Then you can get in there with the chisel and get it to pry the rest of the way loose. Or you could just use a spot weld cutter. That's probably the best thing to do. And then we're going to come around the front here. You see where it's got this. We're just going to cut that. And then we're going to use our chisel, our makeshift chisel, I guess, and pry this apart. Don't damage the threads there. That's what holds the hinges on as well. And then finally, we'll get back here. And you see I've got this started pried up. So what I like to do, and this is spot welded to the side of this pillar. So what I like to do is, as you can see, get it started, right? And then what I'm going to do is work my way down to widen this, slightly tapping it to get it widened out. And then we'll come behind it with the real flat chisel so that we can break the spot welds. And then that will pull this free. It's still going to be connected up under there a little bit, but once we get this pried away, from the pillar and the spot welds that are on this side broke loose, and if you run into trouble with them, you just could clean this off, get it down to bare metal, and then you search out the spot welds and use a spot weld cutter to cut them free. But at any rate, get this pulled out, get it pried off, get this piece separated from the pillar. Then what you're going to want to do is cut it. Pick you a spot to cut. I would say cut right here. So just, there's the hinge opening, trace around, just cut out right here. Then that would drop all this off, and then all you have to work with would be this much of it, trying to get it wiggled out. And then once we get this cut off, you'll be able to see up inside there and see what all this is connected to. So as we're ripping into this, I want you to notice that there are spot welds here on this flap, as will be the same on the other side. So keep that in mind when you go to do the other side. So there's spot welded pretty good. There was a few of them there. And when you get up here, I cleaned these off so that you could see right here at the end. There's 2 spot welds because this panel dips up and under there. So it's time to break out the spot weld cutter. And if you do not have a spot weld cutter, you need a sharp drill bit to just drill out this weld to the way you can pop this panel free from that one. You just drill through it. I mean, you're going to put the panel back in under there, and then you're just going to clamp it good, and then just like they did it, you get over here, you're going to put a weld with the new panel in there. You could even touch it up here if you wanted to, and then of course you're going to get this hammered back down, and then you're going to clean this out, but then re-spot weld this hole back to this like it was, and then you can see up here we're going to be doing a lot of welding to get everything back together. But hey, let's get the panel off and get a look at the inside of the truck and then go from there. All these little holes represent where spot welds were, and we cut them free, and that's the only way you're going to be able to remove the cowling. So get your hands on spot weld cutter, or once again a very sharp drill bit. I use the drill bit because it just chews right through it. Spot weld cutters are cool, but you also got to have the drill to start it, because the little pin in the nose of it has to have a little hole, a guide, a pilot, in order for the chewer to start chewing. So I just use real sharp drill bits and then cut the welds out and then take the chisel, get in behind. So here we are on the inside, and we've done our best work removing some spot welds, as you can see right through there, and see that threaded nut. That's what's going to attach our hinge. Once we put the hinges back on there, it kind of secures it, because you do have some locking nuts that are installed on the hinge itself. This is a third one. You might remember from when we removed them. Now, this is all one piece. This is actually part of the old kick panel, and it goes all the way up. As you can see, it has an end point, and then it bends and folds underneath. Then you have that bracing right there, and it still has one of the holes for the mirrors to attach. It has the lead fill in it. You can see the daylight through that one. That's the one that we're going to use in junction with that one to put our mirror back on when it's time. But I knocked the lead fill out just so that you guys could see through there. And there's the bracketry. So we don't want to disturb that, but we need to get our cowl on, and see, when I touch it, all of that moves with it. So we're going to lose our threaded nut there, but that's okay. We can replace it on the back side of the other cowling. The main thing is we need to get this loose. It's loose and ready to come out, but we got to just do a little bit more finagling, and it's just a wrestling match. So let me get a hold of it again from the outside and try to pull it free. The spot welds are broke free. There were spot welds in the upper, so I got it broke loose, but you can see where the spot welds were. It's spot welded behind here, but we were able to tear those out when we were chiseling. And then you see these little spots were a spot weld. And if I got it out further, I folded this down a little bit to where you can't see where those are ripped out from. But here's the thing. Our new piece has a piece that goes up and under, right? Well, we want it to slide between this and that brace that's back there. But right now we have some curved up metal that's going to hinder that. So once we get this off, we're going to get a set of pliers and pull the old metal that's tore off, pull it down, get it flattened out. And then if we can't wiggle it out of there, we'll just cut it off here at the seam. And then that will enable us to take our new panel and slide the piece that needs to slide up under. It'll go up and under in between the bracing and the cowling. And then from that inside, we will pinch them together and spot weld it back together like it's supposed to be. So for right now, we need to get what remains of the cowl off of there. So the goal here is to get this out and not damage the upper cowl, any of the upper cowling. So we're just gonna manhandle it and try to pull it down. Uh-oh. Heard something. Just keep manhandling. If I can't get it to bust free, what I'm going to do is get the saw out or the cutting wheel, and then I'll just start cutting and then work with a smaller piece because, okay, we got it moving inbound. Now this is what you're hearing is part of the old cowling dragging against the inside of the truck. So we still might have to do some cutting to get that away from there and help us, because the old kick panel is kind of hindering us right at this moment. So in order to keep from distorting something that I don't want distorted, well, that was a spot weld. And the thing with metal, you keep wiggling it back and forth, and then eventually, you know, it'll break for you. But so we're gonna try that. I see what we're hung up on. We got one more spot weld, and it's one that's place. There we go. Yeah, got him. So this is what was up in there. Of course, it's mangled now, but if we can kind of fold this back somewhat, it was in there like this, and this was spot welded to that bracing where the window mounts would be. There's a piece of triangulated bracing up in here, and this was spot welded to that. So that was the outside, and then inside there it was like this. Now, don't get rid of this nut. We're gonna save them, because what we're gonna do is once we get everything done, before we're done with everything and we move on to something else with the truck, we'll have our kick panels in and we'll have the cowlings on. We're just gonna weld this back into place where it needs to be. So yeah, it's a lot of good spot welds inside there, but we got it broke free. We now have all of the outer cowl. So let's have a look. This is our replacement panel. Now, like I mentioned, there's a piece. There's a two pieces under here that's broke off and they're bent that away. So they're going to hinder this going up, because that's what has to happen. This has to go up there like that, and then you can, you know, drill your holes and spot weld it back in and make a tight seam. So just as a mock-up test fit, let's see here. And again, we're just mocking things up. You might have to do some trimming and some fitting to get it to do what you need it to do and go where you need it to go. That's the cool thing about these aftermarket panels. They give you a little bit more space than you need, and that helps. Surely helps. Definitely does not hurt. And then, yeah, so that's what we'll be looking like. And then, of course, you know, we'll snug all this back down and get it tight. But the main thing is to get the cowling and the pillars lined up where they're supposed to be. So we're looking good. Just gonna have to do some forming and then figuring out how to blend all this together when it's time to do body work. Man, we've been going. So with the cowling out, it's time to focus on getting this rocker straightened out and then get our floor bracing straightened out as far as the position it needs to be in and the rocker at the right height. So that's our next step. The cowling, the outside cowling, it has to go on last. We have to get this rocker straightened out. We have to get the lower A pillar straightened out. And we have to get our floor bracing straightened out at this point. So that's what we're getting ready to work on. We got to focus on that. And then that will straighten up the cab. Then we can worry about pretty much the cosmetics, which is the outer cowl panel and all that stuff, because there's going to be a little bit of trimming, a little bit of fitting to make it go. It's a repop. It's not exact, but it's good enough, and it gives us a little more space than we need. So that's where the trimming is going to come into play, up towards the top of that cowling. But our focus is to get the bracing and the rocker straightened out and get them. So that's going to do it for this edition of So You Want to Build an AD. Hope you look forward to the next episode, which is going to show us straightening out this rocker, getting our floor bracing in, and then laying the floor out in this truck. I want to send a big shout out to Joe's Racing Products, LS Fabrication, and Champion Cooling Systems. I'd like to remind you also that when you have time, check out my podcast streaming on Apple Podcasts, the Podbean app for you non-Apple users, and Spotify. Another thing I'd like to remind you of is that I have an online Patinacode store where we feature the Patinacode t-shirts that you see me wearing throughout the episodes. Here in the near future, we're going to be stocking the store with actual hard parts, aftermarket parts that I actually use to build these vehicles. I really do appreciate you guys checking these out and supporting the page. And finally, if you're on Instagram, check me out at Patinacode. I'm Dennis for This Is So You Want to Build an AD. Thanks for watching. Stay with me.
Step aside, get right behind.